John had always lived on the edge, scraping by in a small apartment in a rundown part of town. He worked 2 jobs, one during the day as a handyman, and one at night cleaning offices. The days bled into each other, a blur of exhaustion and worry. He could barely keep his head above water, but despite the constant struggle, there was a gentleness about him. A kindness. Maybe that's why life had been so hard. He couldn't say no to people in need, even when he had nothing to give. It was late one evening, just after finishing his shift. The streets were quiet, the chill of the night air biting at his worn-out jacket. On his usual walk home, he passed the park he'd seen every day. But tonight something was different. There, on the bench under the dim glow of the streetlight, sat 2 small figures. As he approached, he realized it was 2 children, dirty, scared, and alone. He crouched down, looking at their faces. The girl was maybe 7, her hair matted, her little brother even younger, clutching her hand tightly. They didn't speak at first, only staring at him with wide, fearful eyes. He spoke softly, asking them where their parents were. The girl, after a long pause, said their mother had told them to wait for her, but she hadn't come back. Hours must have passed since then, and it was clear the kids were terrified. John glanced around. No one else was there. The park was empty, and the city's indifference hung heavy in the air. He couldn't leave them like this. "Come with me," he said, his voice calm, hiding his own unease. He led them back to his apartment, the boy silent, the girl holding her brother's hand tightly as they walked beside him. Back at his cramped place, John scrambled together what little food he had, some bread and soup, while the kids sat quietly at the table, too polite to say they were starving, but he could tell. As they ate, he gently tried to get more information from them. The girl, Lily, was hesitant to speak, but eventually, she said their mother's name was Sarah. She didn't know where she'd gone or why she left them. Then came something that sent a shiver through John. Lily mentioned bad men. She said they had been chasing their mother, and Sarah told them to hide until she came back. John's heart sank. This wasn't just a case of neglect or a mother who'd abandoned her kids. There was something dangerous at play here. The story didn't add up, but the fear in the girl's eyes was real. The boy, Max, was too young to understand much, only repeating his sister's words. "Bad men, Mama," in a soft, trembling voice. John didn't know what to do. He was just a guy trying to get by, barely able to take care of himself, let alone 2 kids with a story like this. His instinct told him to call the authorities, but another part of him wasn't so sure. Something felt off. That night, he set up a makeshift bed for the kids on his old couch. As they fell asleep, John sat in the chair across from them, watching. His thoughts raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this situation than the kids were letting on. Maybe they didn't know the full story themselves. But one thing was clear, they were scared, and someone dangerous might be looking for them. He glanced at his phone, ready to call the police, but his hand hesitated. What if there was more at stake here? What if calling the authorities put these kids in more danger? As the hours passed and the quiet of the night settled in, John made a decision. He wasn't going to report it, not yet. Something told him to wait, to figure things out first. As the city outside his window slept, John sat there, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. He had no idea what he was getting himself into, but whatever it was, he couldn't turn his back now. The kids needed him. And that was enough to make him stay. John's apartment, though small and worn, slowly starts to feel a little warmer with Lily and Max around. Over the next few days, John finds himself slipping into the role of caregiver naturally, almost without realizing it. He takes them out for short walks to the park, buys them small treats with the little money he has, and even manages to find an old set of crayons tucked away in a drawer. He watches as Max scribbles on a scrap of paper, while Lily tries to show him how to draw a house. Their laughter, even brief, feels like a quiet victory amidst the chaos. John remembers what it was like to grow up with little. He can see the same hunger and uncertainty in their eyes that he used to feel. But these kids, they'd been through something else, something darker. Despite their smiles, He knows they're holding on to something heavy. He feels the growing weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. They need him, and more than that, he needs to protect them. He might not have much, but he can give them this, a small sense of safety in an otherwise unpredictable world. One evening, as he's tidying up the living room after the kids have fallen asleep, he notices something sticking out of Max's backpack. He pulls out a crumpled, folded photograph, yellowed and worn at the edges. It's a picture of their mother, Sarah, standing next to a man in a sharp suit. The man looks out of place, powerful, like someone important, someone dangerous, even. There's something about his cold smile that unsettles John. Flipping the photo over, he notices an address and a date scribbled on the back in faded ink. Questions start flooding John's mind. Who is this man? Why was Sarah with him, and what kind of trouble had she found herself in? His gut tells him that Sarah had gotten tangled up in something far beyond what he'd imagined. His first instinct is to turn the photo over to the authorities, but the bond he's formed with Lily and Max makes him hesitate. He doesn't want to put them in a worse situation, especially if the authorities are as uninterested as they seemed before. The more time he spends with them, the more he feels responsible for their well-being. Later that night, while John is tucking them into bed, Lily's voice interrupts the quiet. Her face serious, her eyes wide with a look far too old for her years, she whispers to him. There were bad men, she says, her words cutting through the stillness. They were chasing Mom. She told us to hide because they wanted something she had. John's heart pounds as her words sink in. This isn't just about an absent mother or a neglectful parent. This is something much more dangerous, something involving people who were willing to hurt, or even kill to get what they wanted. Lily's face softens for a moment, as she looks up at John, as if seeking reassurance. He gently brushes her hair back and tells her it'll be okay, but inside, his mind is racing. Whatever Sarah had, it's put her children in grave danger. He doesn't know how deep this goes, but his protective instincts flare. He needs to act, but how? What if getting involved makes things worse? He doesn't have the means or the knowledge to deal with criminals, but there's no turning back now. He's already in too deep, and the kids are counting on him. John spends the rest of the night unable to sleep, his mind replaying Lily's words over and over. His thoughts drift back to the photo, to the man's face, to the address written on the back. Maybe that address could lead him to answers. Maybe it could help him find Sarah or at least get some idea of what she's involved in. He resolves to check it out the next day, hoping that it'll give him the clues he needs to keep Lily and Max safe. He doesn't tell them about the photo or the address. There's no need to burden them with more fear. But the weight of it all hangs over him, heavy and ominous. He can't shake the feeling that this is just the beginning of something much larger than he ever anticipated. John made his way to the address on the back of the photo, a place far removed from the dingy neighborhood where he lived. The contrast was striking. A luxurious, sprawling mansion, clearly once a symbol of wealth and power, now abandoned and eerily quiet. It looked like whoever lived there had left in a hurry. Dust covered the once pristine floors, and furniture was overturned as if the place had been ransacked. As John cautiously searched the mansion, he found small, but important, signs of Sarah's presence. An old photograph tucked into the pages of a forgotten book, showing Sarah with the same man from the crumpled photo he had found. But this house held more than just memories, it held secrets. In one of the upstairs rooms, John found an envelope hidden beneath a drawer. The words, "Top Secret," were boldly stamped across it. Inside were documents, financial records, receipts, and emails, each hinting at Sarah's involvement with a criminal organization. It became clear, Sarah hadn't just been involved, she had been running from them, likely after uncovering something that made her a target. John's stomach tightened as he flipped through the pages of a journal he found nearby, scribbled in Sarah's handwriting. Her words detailed her growing fear, the feeling of being watched, of knowing that dangerous men were after her. She wrote about something valuable she had, something they would stop at nothing to get back. This wasn't just about a mother abandoning her children. Sarah had been trying to protect them from something far bigger and more dangerous than John had imagined. Later that evening, John returned to his apartment, his mind racing with everything he'd uncovered. But as soon as he stepped inside, his heart sank. His apartment was a mess, furniture overturned, drawers emptied, everything strewn about as if someone had been searching for something. He rushed to check on the kids. They were unharmed, but the look of terror in their eyes said it all. They had heard the intruders and had been hiding under the table, shaking in fear. John's mind went blank with panic. Whoever had broken in was looking for something. They knew about the kids, and now they knew about him. He quickly hid the documents he had taken from the mansion, tucking them away in a place he hoped no one would think to look. Sitting with the children, he tried to reassure them, telling them everything would be okay, but the words felt hollow. He was starting to understand just how dangerous this situation had become. That night, the tension in the apartment was suffocating. John barely slept, his nerves on edge, every small sound sending his heart racing. In the middle of the night, a noise outside caught his attention. He crept to the window, his breath shallow, and peered out through a crack in the curtains. Across the street, two men stood in the shadows, barely visible under the streetlights. They weren't doing anything, just standing there, but John knew these were the men Sarah had written about. They were watching his apartment, waiting, planning their next move. John's hands clenched into fists. It was no longer just about uncovering a mystery. His life and the lives of Lily and Max were now in real danger. Those men weren't going to stop, and he knew it was only a matter of time before they acted. He had no choice. He needed to find Sarah. Whatever she had, whatever she knew, it was the only way to protect the children. But how could he even begin to track her down? The weight of the situation pressed down on him, almost suffocating. Time was running out, and he couldn't afford any mistakes. As dawn approached, John sat at the table, staring at the journal and documents in front of him. He had to act, and fast. It was time to take matters into his own hands. John knew he couldn't run forever. The men who had been watching his apartment were closing in, and he could feel the pressure mounting with every passing hour. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about protecting Lily and Max. He arranged for the children to stay with Mrs. Wallace, the elderly neighbor next door. She didn't ask too many questions, only nodding and understanding when he told her it was an emergency. With the children safe, at least for the moment, John steeled himself for what was to come. That evening, as darkness fell, the men appeared. John heard the knock at his door, a slow, deliberate sound that echoed through the quiet apartment. When he opened it, he found himself face to face with the same two men he'd seen watching from the shadows. Their expressions were cold, emotionless, but their eyes carried the weight of violence. John's heart raced, but he stood firm, blocking the entrance, his fists clenched at his sides. One of the men spoke, his voice low and threatening. "We're here for the children. Hand them over, and no one gets hurt." John's jaw tightened, and he shook his head, the fear he'd been suppressing now replaced by something stronger, rage. "You're not getting anywhere near those kids. I don't care what Sarah did. You'll have to go through me first." The men exchanged glances, unimpressed. "Do you even know what she's done? She stole something from us, something that could bring down a lot of powerful people. We don't want to hurt anyone, but we will if we have to. Give us the kids, and we'll leave you alone." John's blood boiled. These men were after innocent children, willing to use them as bait to draw Sarah out. He couldn't believe the depth of their cruelty. But something in him snapped. He wasn't a fighter, wasn't someone used to standing up against this kind of threat, but for the first time in his life, John felt a surge of determination, a sense of purpose that outweighed his fear. "I won't let you touch them," he said, his voice steady. "You're going to have to go through me, and I promise you, it won't be easy." The men took a step forward, and for a tense moment, John thought it would come to blows. His heart pounded in his chest, and he braced himself for the worst. He wasn't sure how long he could hold them off, but he wasn't backing down. Not now. But before the situation could escalate, a voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Stop!" John turned, shocked, to see Sarah standing in the doorway. She was thinner than the photo had shown, her face tired and worn from running, but there was a fierce determination in her eyes. She had been there all along, lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting for the right moment to intervene. The men paused, surprised by her sudden appearance. Sarah stepped forward, holding a small black case in her hand. "This is what you want, isn't it?" she said, her voice calm but firm. "All the evidence you need to bury your organization. I'll give it to you, just leave John and the children out of this." One of the men sneered. "And why should we believe you'll hand it over?" Sarah's eyes flicked to John, then back to the men. "Because I have no choice. You've been chasing me for months. I'm tired. I just want this to be over. But if you touch John or my kids, I swear I'll take this evidence and go public. Everything will be exposed." There was a tense silence as the men considered her words. Finally, the leader stepped forward, his gaze cold but calculating. "Fine. Give us the case, and we'll let them go. But know this, if you even think about betraying us, we'll come back. And next time, it won't just be a warning." Sarah handed over the case without hesitation. John could see the weight of the decision in her eyes, the sacrifices she had made to protect her children, and now, to protect him. The men took the case and left without another word, but their threat lingered in the air like a dark cloud. They would be watching. This wasn't over. As the door clicked shut, the tension in the room slowly began to dissolve. John exhaled a breath he didn't know he had been holding. The confrontation was over, but the danger still hung heavy in the air. Sarah turned to him, her eyes filled with exhaustion but also a glimmer of relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "For protecting them." John nodded, unsure of what to say. The nightmare wasn't over, but for now, they were safe. Together, he and Sarah would have to figure out what to do next, how to keep the children out of harm's way, and how to escape the shadow of the powerful organization still looming over them. Sarah looked at John, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. "I knew I could trust you," she said softly. "You're the kind of person who does the right thing, even when it's hard." Her words struck a chord deep within him. They shared a moment of relief, the tension from the confrontation still palpable in the air but slowly dissipating. Lily and Max, having watched the exchange with wide eyes, suddenly burst into action. They ran to their mother, wrapping their small arms around her legs. The joy in their voices as they called out for her was a sweet sound, filling the room with warmth. "Mommy! You came back!" Their laughter rang like music, drowning out the earlier chaos and fear. Sarah knelt down, holding them close, her tears mingling with their giggles. John stepped back, allowing the moment to unfold, feeling a bittersweet happiness wash over him. While he might have been a struggling man before, this act of bravery had ignited something within him, a sense of purpose he hadn't realized he was missing. The world outside felt different now, brighter. Sarah turned to John, her expression softening. "You took care of them when I couldn't. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you." John nodded, the weight of his earlier fears lifting slightly. They discussed plans, Sarah explaining how she intended to gather the remaining evidence and expose the criminal organization once and for all. She hinted at the possibility of John working alongside her, using the documents they still had as leverage. "Together we can make a difference," she said, her determination igniting a fire in John's heart. Though John was still poor, he felt richer than he had in a long time. He had stepped up, taken risks, and found a strength within himself that he never knew existed. He realized that this wasn't just about survival. It was about fighting for what was right, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The challenges ahead felt daunting, but for the first time, he was ready to face them. As he watched Sarah with her children, he reflected on his journey. He may not have much in terms of material wealth, but he had gained something invaluable: the knowledge that courage and kindness could forge a new path, even in the darkest of times. His heart swelled as he thought about how far he had come, from a man struggling to get by to someone who could stand up for others. The laughter of the children filled the room, and he felt a sense of peace wash over him. This was his new reality, a life filled with purpose and connection. As he stood there, watching the family reunite, a warm hope blossomed in his chest. Just then, he noticed Max tugging at Sarah's sleeve, a bright smile on his face. "Can we play hide and seek, Mommy?" John couldn't help but smile at the innocence and joy radiating from them. In that moment, he felt a glimmer of hope for the future. No matter the challenges ahead, they would face them together. As John took a deep breath, he embraced this new chapter, knowing he had finally found his place.